There is a specific kind of loss that no one warns you about. Not the loss of not knowing where you are going, or what you want, or which direction to turn next. That kind of loss, most people have felt before, and most people know, eventually, how to find their way back. This is different. This is the loss of looking in the mirror and not fully recognizing the person looking back. Not because anything visible has changed. Not because your face is different or your life looks unrecognizable from the outside, but because somewhere along the way, quietly, gradually, in ways you didn't notice until it was already done, you stopped being yourself. And now, standing on the other side of something that nearly broke you, you are trying to remember who that person was before all of this began. If you know that feeling, this audiobook was made for you. What happened to you was not a bad relationship in the ordinary sense of the word. It was not simply two people who were wrong for each other, or a partnership that ran its course, or a friendship that faded the way some friendships do. What happened to you was a systematic, ongoing erosion of your identity, your confidence, your sense of reality, and your trust in your own mind. And the reason healing from it feels so much harder than anything else you have ever been through is not because you are weak or broken or somehow doing recovery wrong. It is because what was taken from you was not just a relationship. It was yourself. By the end of this audiobook, you will understand exactly what narcissistic abuse does to the mind and the identity. Why healing from it follows its own timeline and cannot be rushed or compared to anything else. And most importantly, the specific steps through which people rebuild themselves fully. Not just surviving what happened, but becoming someone stronger, clearer, and more grounded in their own truth than they were before any of this began. You are not starting over. You are starting from experience. Chapter 1. Understanding what narcissistic abuse actually does to the mind. Most people, when they first encounter the term narcissistic abuse, assume it refers simply to being treated badly by someone selfish. And while selfishness is certainly present, reducing it to that misses the deeper, more damaging truth entirely. Narcissistic abuse is a specific, sustained pattern of psychological manipulation designed, whether consciously or unconsciously by the person inflicting it, to keep you confused, dependent, and doubting your own perception of reality. It works through a combination of mechanisms that individually might seem manageable, but together, layered over months or years, they create something far more damaging than any single incident ever could. Love bombing followed by withdrawal teaches your nervous system to associate anxiety with love, to stay in a constant state of low-level panic, trying to earn back the warmth that felt so real at the beginning. Gaslighting, the persistent denial of your reality, your memory, your feelings, teaches you to stop trusting your own mind. Intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable cycle of kindness and cruelty, creates the same psychological dependency pattern documented in addiction research, bonding you more powerfully to someone who hurts you than you would ever bond with someone who treated you consistently well. By the time most people leave a narcissistic relationship, their nervous system has been conditioned to function in survival mode. Hypervigilance has replaced relaxation. People-pleasing has replaced self-expression. The constant internal monitoring of another person's mood has replaced any natural attention to your own needs, feelings, or desires. You became, without realizing it was happening, an expert at managing someone else's emotional world while losing all access to your own. This is not weakness. This is the predictable, documented result of sustained psychological pressure applied over time to someone whose capacity for empathy and trust made them vulnerable to it in the first place. Chapter 2. Why healing feels so much harder than other breakups. People around you may have said things that felt dismissive without meaning to. Just move on. It's been 6 months. Why are you still thinking about someone who treated you that way? And you may have asked yourself the same questions privately, wondering why you can't seem to shake something that, from the outside, looks like it should already be finished and done. Here is why. When a healthy relationship ends, however painfully, you are grieving something that was real. A real connection, real shared history, a real person who existed more or less as you understood them to exist. That grief is clean in the sense that what you are mourning actually happened. When a narcissistic relationship ends, the grief is entirely different in nature. You are grieving someone who was never fully real. The person you fell in love with, the person you trusted, the person you restructured your entire life around, was largely a constructed image, a reflection of what you needed to see, shown to you strategically during the love-bombing phase and withdrawn the moment it was no longer useful. You are grieving not just the loss of a relationship, but the loss of an entire version of reality you believed in completely. And underneath that grief is something even harder to sit with. The destabilizing realization that your own perception, the very faculty you rely on to navigate the world and make decisions, was systematically deceived. This is why recovery from narcissistic abuse so often involves not just emotional healing, but a fundamental rebuilding of self-trust, something that takes far longer than any ordinary breakup, because it goes so much deeper than any ordinary loss. Chapter 3. The Identity Erosion. How you lost yourself and why. Identity erosion in a narcissistic relationship rarely happens dramatically. There is usually no single moment where you chose to abandon yourself, no clear decision point you can look back at and name. Instead, it happens incrementally, through 1,000 small adjustments made in the name of keeping the peace, earning approval, or avoiding the particular pain of being on the wrong side of someone who could make your world feel very cold when they chose to. You stopped expressing opinions that had previously been dismissed or ridiculed. You adjusted your tone, your wardrobe, your social circle, your ambitions, your very personality, not because you genuinely wanted to, but because the cost of staying yourself became too high to keep paying. You learned what was safe to say and what was not. You learned which version of yourself received warmth and which received withdrawal. And slowly, without fully realizing it was happening, the authentic version of you grew quieter and smaller, while the version of you that could survive this relationship grew louder and took over. This is not a personal failure. It is a survival adaptation, a genuinely intelligent response to an environment that punished authenticity and rewarded compliance. The problem is that survival adaptations built for one specific environment don't simply switch off the moment that environment changes. They become habitual. They become, in time, invisible. And the work of recovery involves making them visible again, examining them one by one, and deciding, consciously and deliberately, which ones you are keeping and which ones you are ready to let go of entirely. Chapter 4. Grieving someone who was never really who you thought they were. This is often the part of recovery that people around you understand the least. They see someone grieving deeply over a relationship with a person who hurt them, and they cannot reconcile those two things. Why would you miss someone who treated you this way? Why does it still hurt so much when you know rationally and clearly what they were? Because what you are grieving is not who they actually were. You are grieving who you believed they were. The person who showed you extraordinary warmth at the beginning. The person who seemed to understand you in a way no one ever had. The potential you saw in them, the version of them that appeared occasionally and kept you hoping. That version felt real. The connection felt real. The love you felt, regardless of whether it was fully returned, was absolutely real. Grief does not operate on logic. Grief responds to what was felt, not what was true. And allowing yourself to grieve fully, without shame, without rushing toward acceptance before the grief is actually done, is not a sign that you are still attached to someone harmful. It is a sign that you are human, that you loved genuinely, and that what you lost mattered to you even when it was hurting you. The grief will not last forever, but it will last as long as it needs to. Chapter 5. Reconnecting with your own voice. After years of self-doubt. One of the quietest and most lasting effects of narcissistic abuse is the erosion of your confidence in your own voice. Not just your literal voice, though many survivors describe becoming quieter, more hesitant in their speech, more likely to qualify or apologize before expressing any opinion. But your internal voice, the one that knows what you feel, what you want, what you think, what you need. The one that is supposed to guide your decisions and tell you, clearly and without hesitation, what is right for you. After years of having that voice overridden, dismissed, contradicted, or mocked, most survivors stop listening to it altogether. Not as a choice, but as a consequence. It kept saying things that got them into trouble, that led to conflict, that disrupted the fragile peace they were working so hard to maintain. And so they learned to silence it, to override it themselves before anyone else could, to manage their own internal reality the way a hostage manages their behavior. Reconnecting with that voice is one of the most important and most underrated parts of recovery. It does not happen instantly. It begins in small, almost imperceptible moments. Noticing what you actually want for dinner without immediately deferring to someone else's preference. Noticing what you actually feel in a conversation without immediately reframing it into something more acceptable. Noticing when something feels wrong to you without immediately explaining away that feeling to avoid making it someone else's problem. If this chapter is resonating with you right now, share this audiobook today with someone you know who has gone quiet in a way that doesn't feel like peace. Sometimes, the most important gift you can give another person is the language to recognize that their silence was learned, not chosen, and that it can be unlearned in exactly the same way. Chapter 6. Rebuilding self-trust when your judgment feels permanently broken. There's a particular kind of shame that lives underneath narcissistic abuse recovery that most people don't talk about openly enough. It is not the shame of having been hurt. Most survivors can eventually make peace with the fact that they were targeted. The shame that lingers longer, that cuts deeper, is the shame directed at their own judgment. How did I not see it sooner? How did I keep believing things that were not true? How did I explain away so many moments that, looking back now, seem obvious? Here is what most people in recovery need to hear, clearly and without softening. Your judgment was not broken. it was manipulated. Those are two categorically different things, and the difference matters enormously for your recovery. A broken judgment system would have failed you across all contexts, with all people, throughout your life. But that is almost certainly not your experience. What happened in this specific situation was not a systemic failure of your judgment. It was a targeted, sustained campaign to override it, carried out by someone who had significant practice at doing exactly that. Rebuilding self-trust after this kind of experience is not about never being wrong again. It is about returning gradually and with patience to the practice of listening to yourself before you listen to anyone else, starting with small things. Noticing your gut response to a situation before you think about how someone else might want you to respond. Letting yourself form an opinion before you check whether it will be well received. You are not starting over. You are starting from experience. Chapter 7. Setting boundaries without guilt or explanation. Most survivors of narcissistic abuse have a complicated, often painful relationship with the concept of boundaries. Not because they don't understand what boundaries are in theory, but because their experience has taught them, through repetition and consequence, that expressing a boundary leads to punishment, to withdrawal of warmth, to being labeled difficult, selfish, too sensitive, or ungrateful, to arguments that somehow, reliably and mysteriously, always ended with them apologizing for having needed something in the first place. This conditioning doesn't simply stop the moment the relationship does. It lives in the body. It shows up as a physical tightening before you say no to anyone. A reflexive anxiety when you sense that someone might be disappointed in you. An almost automatic urge to over-explain, justify, or soften any expression of your own needs until the need itself is barely recognizable underneath all the apology layered on top of it. A boundary is not an ultimatum. It is not an aggression. It is not a punishment directed at someone else. It is simply a description of what you will and will not accept in your own life. It requires no justification beyond the fact that it is yours. The goal is not to become someone who never feels that discomfort. The goal is to feel it and hold the boundary anyway, consistently enough, across enough situations, that your nervous system gradually learns a new truth. That expressing your limits does not destroy relationships worth keeping. Start small. You do not need to begin with the hardest conversations. Every small held boundary is practice. Every held boundary is evidence. Every held boundary is one more deposit in the account that was emptied, returned now to its rightful owner. Chapter 8. Recognizing the patterns that made you vulnerable. This chapter requires the gentlest handling of anything in this audiobook, because it is the chapter most likely to be misread as blame. So let me say clearly, at the beginning, what this chapter is not. It is not a suggestion that you caused what happened to you. You did not. It is not a suggestion that your vulnerability was a moral failing or a character flaw. It was not. Most people who become targets of narcissistic abuse share a cluster of traits that are, in themselves, admirable. Deep empathy, a strong drive toward fairness and giving the benefit of the doubt, a tendency to assume that others operate from the same good faith they themselves bring to relationships, a history sometimes of environments where love was conditional or inconsistent, which created a familiarity with working hard to earn approval that felt less like a red flag and more like home. These are not weaknesses, but they are patterns. and patterns, once seen clearly, can be worked with, not abandoned, because abandoning your empathy or your good faith would cost you more than it would protect you, but held more carefully, offered more slowly, balanced with a watchfulness that was perhaps absent before, a willingness to let time, rather than intensity, determine how much access someone earns to the deeper parts of who you are. Understanding your patterns is not about self-criticism. It is about self-knowledge. And self-knowledge, built honestly and without shame, is one of the most durable forms of protection available to you going forward. Chapter 9. Building a new identity, rooted in self-knowledge, not approval. At some point in recovery, usually after the acute pain has softened enough to allow for something beyond simple survival, a question arrives that is both exciting and frightening in equal measure. Who am I now? Not who was I before this happened, and not who did this relationship turn me into. But who am I now, having been through this, having survived this, having learned what I have learned in the hardest possible classroom? This question is the beginning of something genuinely new. Not a return to who you were, though some of that person will absolutely resurface, recognizable and welcome, as the recovery progresses. But the construction of something that didn't fully exist before. A version of you that is built on self-knowledge rather than approval. That knows its own values, not because someone validated them, but because they were tested and held. Identity built on approval is fragile because it depends on something outside itself to remain intact. Identity built on self-knowledge is different in its very foundation. It does not require an audience to exist. It does not shift its shape based on who is in the room or what reaction it is receiving. This is what you are building now, whether it feels that way yet or not. Every moment you choose your own honest response over the one most likely to be well received, you are building it. Every moment you stay with a feeling long enough to understand it, rather than immediately managing it for someone else's comfort, you are building it. Every moment you make a decision based on what is true for you rather than what earns approval from someone else, you are building it. Chapter 10. Integration. Who you are becoming and why the pain was not wasted. There will come a moment, and if you are still in the middle of recovery, it may feel impossibly far away right now. But it will come when you look back at everything that happened to you and realize that the person standing on this side of it is not despite what you went through, but in some real and undeniable way because of it. Not because the abuse was acceptable, not because what was done to you was anything other than wrong, but because the human capacity to grow through suffering is genuine, documented, and in your case, already underway. Even on the days when it doesn't feel like growth at all and still feels only like pain. The version of you that exists on the other side of this experience knows things that cannot be learned any other way. Knows what it feels like to lose yourself and find your way back. Knows the specific texture of manipulation, which means it is far harder to miss in the future. Knows that you can survive things you never imagined surviving. Knows your own strength not as an abstract quality you've been told you have, but as something you have personally, demonstrably, under the most difficult possible conditions, proven. None of that knowledge was free. None of it came without cost, and you did not deserve to pay what you paid to acquire it. But it is yours now. Permanently, irrevocably yours. No one can take it back. You are rebuilding yourself. Not from nothing, because you were never nothing, but from everything. from every piece of yourself that survived when it had every reason not to. From every moment you kept going when the weight of what you were carrying made stopping feel like the only option. From every quiet act of self-preservation, however small, however invisible to everyone around you, that kept enough of you intact to arrive at this moment, in this chapter, listening to these words. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. If this audiobook gave you language for something you have been living without words for, share it today with someone who is still searching for that language. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can give another person is the simple recognition that what they are going through has a name, that it makes sense, that they are not too sensitive or too broken or too slow to heal. They are exactly where they are supposed to be in a process that takes exactly as long as it takes. This has been Beyond Pages. If you are ready to keep building, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next chapter is waiting for you.